Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast. I'm Philip Ideson, a 20-year procurement practitioner, former head of procurement, advisor to procurement leaders around the world, and the founder and managing director of Art of Procurement. My team and I work with our global network of subject matter experts to help companies elevate procurement's impact, whether that's through building and implementing transformation programs, sustainably reducing external expenses, or leveraging AOP Mastermind, our learning and development platform for companies of all sizes. You're listening to our flagship podcast, where we pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that leading procurement teams are using to align their results with the needs of the business. Hi everybody, and thanks for joining me again this week on the podcast. And in last week's podcast, I shared the concept of the flywheel in the terms used by Good to Great author Jim Collins. If you haven't listened to that, I would really recommend you go back, go to artofprocurement.com/podcast, see last week's podcast, which really explains some of the context behind what we're going to talk about today. So this week, which is in part 2 of the series, we're going to apply the idea of the flywheel to procurement itself. And this is going to be inspired by how we use the flywheel in our Procurement Inc. framework. This framework that we built, it ensures that procurement strategies and tactics remain aligned with the goals and objectives of the enterprise as a whole. So let's go straight into it. I'm going to share 2 examples of how you can put the flywheel to work. One looks at the flywheel as a way to think about procurement at an organizational level, and the second is how to apply flywheel principles to building more adaptable procurement project management processes, such as the category management or the sourcing process. So let's start at that higher level, the organizational level. And every single day, sales, marketing, and operations teams, they're pursuing the same goals in pursuit of identifying, retaining, and growing their customer base, as we do in procurement, in really trying to do that with our stakeholders. And as they do that, sales and marketing teams, they have for years looked at the process that they go through of turning strangers into customers through using a linear sales funnel. So what does a sales funnel typically look like? And you picture the funnel as an image of a funnel. So the top of the funnel, you are having folks inquire about the services, starting to know a little bit more about your company. Then those who have inquired and want to go to the next level, they become leads, somebody who you want to talk to in a little bit more detail about what you do. Those leads, some of those will go down further in the funnel, and sales teams will talk about them now being an opportunity. So it's something where you're really talking more specifically around designing solutions, mapping out what solutions and what they could look like, putting proposals out there. And then the very bottom of the funnel, some of those opportunities you talk about with some of those prospects will turn into a sale. And if you think about it in another way that sales and marketing folks look at it, the top of the funnel, if you think of yourself as an individual and when you've bought something, the top of it is when you're aware of a company, a product or a service. The next level down is when you actually show some interest in buying a product or service from that company. The next level down is you making a decision. Are you going to buy or not? The bottom of the funnel, you've bought. You're now a customer of that business. Now, the challenge with the linear process from a sales perspective is that it has the singular goal of just securing a sale. What happens after you have made the sale? And that's where the flywheel comes in. So rather than that linear process ending in a sale, the flywheel to keep on turning requires momentum to continue once the sale is made. And so it takes into account the entire customer journey with that goal of turning the strangers not only into customers, but into advocates. And so when you have the opportunity to increase your engagement with those advocates over time, they act really as an unpaid sales force, recommending their peers and contacts to work with you, and obviously looking at ways that they actually will buy more from you for their current organization. Now, when you think about sales and marketing from a flywheel perspective, there's a good example that a software provider called HubSpot has built into a flywheel from a sales and marketing perspective. So now you think of that flywheel, you think of it looking kind of like the clock. It goes in a circular motion. And how they use that from a sales and marketing perspective is really using 3 different elements. So at the top of that flywheel, like the first step of the flywheel, is to attract, you're attracting prospects. Then you go in a circular motion from once you've attracted them into engaging a prospect. And then once you're engaged with a prospect, and this is where it changes from the linear model, is the circle continues to turn into delighting those customers. And they ultimately then become an advocate for you. So that flywheel of going from attracting to engaging to delighting, that flywheel starts moving and moving. You go from delight back to attract to engage to delight. That keeps turning on itself. And that helps you, grow the business and really take advantage of working further with those folks who you've already engaged with, who you put all that effort to take them through that traditional funnel. Obviously doesn't stop there. You're delighting them. That turns them into advocates, and then they're engaging with new strangers, which then attract, and it continues in that circular motion. Now, when we think about that applied to procurement, what specific tactics do you have in place that focus proactively, for example, on that attraction phase, attracting stakeholders for the first time? I often see that that's limited to outreach based on a spend analytics report, where we're then going and saying, hey, you spend this, we've noticed that, there could be an opportunity for us to help you. That's how we go out to try and engage with those stakeholders. As we go into the engage phase, actually, that's where we're strongest. We often have that category management or sourcing process to at least engage with folks once they're interested in working with procurement. And then what tactics do we have to proactively look at delighting stakeholders and turning them into advocates? To be honest with you, I think that's often a blind spot. We often think the results speak for themselves, but that's not often the case, especially when we haven't done the work to understand what's truly important to them. So for any procurement leader listening, I'd really encourage you to look up the HubSpot Flywheel for sales and marketing, and we're going to include a link to that in the show notes for today's podcast. That will be at artofprocurement.com/episode 330. And then once you look at that image of that flywheel, map your current strategies and tactics for attracting, engaging, and delighting your stakeholders. Whether it's, and really you can do it on this on 2 different dimensions, an executive stakeholder or one at the more operational level. Turning that flywheel in a repeatable way is really what's going to drive the sustainable, really longevity and the growth of procurement. And I think that, as we've talked about on the pod before, that's especially important right now, given that a lot of what we're working on is a short-term focus, especially where we have the pandemic going on risk and expense management. Being able to see a bigger picture above that will ensure that once we've taken care of the short term, some of the crisis management and driving some of the optionality into contracts that our businesses are needing right now, that we continue to stay engaged when business starts to turn and it looks up. What I'm going to do, there are so many different tactics and strategies you can use. We're going to cover those in future podcasts. For now, I'd just really encourage you, look at that flywheel, map out what you do today, and think about how proactively you really are in driving each one of those elements from a, that high level, how do we engage folks generally in working with procurement, especially, while I said the executive and operational level, both are important, but specifically at that executive level. Now, the second use of a flywheel in procurement applies to the procurement process itself. And I mentioned in that last example about how the sales process used to be a linear one and is now evolving into a flywheel. But right now, almost all procurement processes, especially sourcing and category management, are also linear. They start with understanding a need and they end with that need being delivered. And that, what delivered means, it's defined either by entering into a supplier contract for the provision of that need, or the go live of that product or service. Responsibility is then transitioned over to the business stakeholder with occasional check-ins. Sometimes they're just informal emails, conversations over the phone. Other times they're through a formal business review process, for example, as part of post-contracting supplier management. Before then, it comes time to source that either supplier, or if you're going to change suppliers, whatever it is, before it comes time to source that product or service again. So this encourages that linear process, and I think it drives, as more than just encourages, an approach to source to a predefined specification or a scope of work rather than to a desired business outcome, because it's really all about, this is what the business needs. Hey, procurement, can you go and help me find it? Well, in part 4 of our Procurement Inc. white paper series, we actually introduced the Flywheel approach to category management and sourcing as an example. And I mentioned this a few minutes ago. I'll just mention it again. We'll include the links to everything that's discussed in the show today, including a link to part 4 of Procurement Inc. That'll be at artofprocurement.com/episode 330. Okay, so I'll walk you through what that flywheel looks like as applied to the category management and sourcing process. And it has 4 components to it: discover, design, build, and grow. And these are pretty high level, the 4 different areas that frankly can also be applied to pretty much any project management in procurement, in the procurement space, not just category management and sourcing. So these 4 components, again, think of it as a flywheel, circular motion. At the top, at 12 o'clock, you have discover. At 3 o'clock, you have design. At 6 o'clock, you have build. 9 o'clock, you have grow. And it just all continues to connect and go around in that flywheel, that circular flywheel motion. So discover is really when you are at the beginning, for the first time. You can be doing this where you really want to understand the needs of the business and the capability of the supply market, and then partner with the business to make sure you have shared strategy goals and objectives in place. Now you move then into the design phase, which is planning. So planning, developing a category or a sourcing strategy and the tactics you're going to use to deliver. And then select is our traditional sourcing process. And that's the process that I think in a lot of organizations, certainly ones that I worked in the past, has that linear kind of beginning and end process to it. But here it's just one part of this flywheel. So once you have finished that design stage with the selection of the supplier and the contracting, you then move into the build phase. And build is really all about integrating and implementing, onboarding the supplier, onboarding the bringing in the product or service that you have bought, building the structures that enables the business and the supplier to actually perform in line with the requirements of the contract. Oftentimes, if we have gone through that linear process, we will stop there. We'll go through sourcing, but we'll stop once it's onboarded. So the 4th element of this flywheel and how it all connects together really is through this grow phase. And in the grow phase, we've broken this down from a category management and sourcing process into collaborate and innovate. So you collaborate with the business to ensure that the goals and objectives are being met that they had at the very beginning. And then innovate, which is through continuous improvement. You're actually looking for new opportunities, ways to reduce cost, ways to even change what you buy the next time round based on the outcomes that the business wants. And I think about this grow phase as soon as you enter it, it's like what you just bought, think of it as being obsolete, because now we're thinking about how we can do things even better, even more effectively, that drive even better business outcomes the next time around. And by continuing that conversation, by being involved in that phase, means that when you think about when procurement gets engaged, one of the things we always struggle with is, I wasn't engaged early in the process. The business only came to me when they'd already decided what they wanted, because they've already been with a supplier. They have an idea of what the scope is. They just want you to come and negotiate a contract. It's kind of an age-old problem that we have. By making sure that we're still involved in that grow phase, through the collaboration of post-award supplier management, really, and then through the innovation of how can we do things even better, even more effectively next time, you're already there at the table discussing, as you loop back into the first part of the flywheel, that discover phase, that understanding phase, the partnering phase. You're already doing it. So you're just continuing the conversation. It's one ongoing conversation around the things that you buy. as opposed to just showing up to run a process, a sourcing process that may drive value, may drive savings, but once it's finished, you're moving on to the next thing and you don't come back to it for another 12 months, for another 3 years, for another 5 years, whatever the length of your contract is. So you think about sourcing and category management in a flywheel. It's continuous, doesn't stop. There's always something that you're doing over the lifetime of that contract that you've just gone and sourced, or that category that you're managing. It helps you to be involved more the next time. And, as you start with if you do this for the first time with a stakeholder, then you may be in that understanding and partnering phase at something that's a low value product or service that they're buying. But the great thing about this is, kind of the momentum that you build enables you to continue getting involved in activities of greater and greater strategic importance. Doing that really enables you to become fully integrated into their decision-making process. And I think that's what we are all striving for here as we look at how do we turn procurement from a tactical to a strategic function, a truly strategic function at scale, not just on one category here or a category there based on our high-performing individuals. How are we doing that at scale? This is a great way to do that and to really build that into your organizational delivery model. Now, as I mentioned a couple of times, we're going to put the links to these different flywheels in the show notes. That's going to be artofprocurement.com/episode 330. I'd love to hear examples that you've used of putting the flywheel into effect within procurement to really drive that engagement that we're all seeking and ultimately driving the impact that we're looking for. But I just want to thank you for joining me on this. Again, it's a shorter pod. We've done a couple of shorter pods the last couple of weeks. We are going to be back for the next 2 or 3 weeks here with interviews. We've already got them lined up. So until next Monday, I hope you have a great week and stay safe, and I will talk to you again soon.